This is episode 26 of the Shame Proof Your Life podcast, the one where I talk about the biggest source of shame in my life right now. I'm your host and life coach, Danita Bremer. Have you ever received a prompting that you ignored for a long time, like 17 years? This podcast is that for me. I'm telling my stories, I'm learning from my past, and I'm inviting you along for the ride because I know my story can help others. I'm not alone, and neither are you. Okay, so I feel like I have a lot of introduction today. I've been doing this project where I am trying to have conversations with people, as many people as possible, just to hear their words and how they describe their struggles, especially LDS women in the area of feeling not good enough. And I've had 11 conversations so far, and it's been so eye opening, so amazing. And recently, I was telling someone about my podcast, and they were asking me questions about, like, well, why did you decide to do a podcast? And I heard myself saying, nobody wants to just hear a podcast of someone telling their life stories. And because I'm a coach and I'm pretty self aware, I kind of noticed that as a thought I was having. And also the reason why I drug my feet so hard on the podcast, just getting it started. I've pretty much known for two, really more like 5 years that eventually I would do a podcast. But it wasn't until this year or late last year that I felt like I had a good enough reason, right? That it wasn't just me telling my life stories. And I've really been questioning that assumption that nobody wants to just hear me talk about my life stories. And maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe the part that people don't like is when I try to turn it into a lesson or a moral or something like that. So I'm trying to relax into just telling my stories because honestly, these conversations I've been having with people, it's been amazing just to hear their stories, not even necessarily what they're learning. Although I love to hear that too, because I feel like it's part of their story. And I really struggled this week. Every week, I try to just think about the podcast and what I feel most prompted to talk about. And this week, really nothing came to me, even after I looked at my list of like stories that I have brainstormed from my life. And so I really just felt like I wanted to talk about whatever was on my heart. But then slowly I started to realize that there was a story that kind of went along with that. And so today I want to talk about, what do I still feel shame about today? And you know what is such an amazing realization that I really wish I could gift to everyone is that I don't feel a whole lot of shame anymore. And when I do, it's usually because I say something that then another person takes the wrong way or interprets differently than I intended. And so it's like I tend to feel shame that I even came across a certain way, which honestly I don't even think is my thing. It's just me still kind of believing that I can create other people's feelings or other people's experiences. And so it was interesting to think of this, like, what do I still feel shame about today? And there are two things that came up, but they feel almost like it's not really true shame that I feel. And I think what it is, as I was preparing for this podcast, I think I did feel shame about these two areas of my life for a really, really long time. And now I feel more grief, is what I would call it. But the one area that I don't know, maybe it goes in between grief and shame is my relationship with my family of origin, specifically my relationship with my two sisters, but also to a lesser extent, my relationship with my dad. I'm not probably going to talk about my dad too much, um, but I do have lots of regret and grief and sadness and some shame too about my relationship with my two sisters. And the other thing I notice coming in here is that I definitely find myself kind of filtering or censoring or just being really careful about how I speak about them, how I portray them. And I really think what it's doing is that it is causing me to be less of myself, filtering them and like really being aware of I don't think they listen to this podcast, but I don't know for sure. They may. And so I notice myself thinking about what if they were to listen to this podcast? What would I want them to hear? Or, what would I want to say? And honestly, that is coming from a shame perspective. Like the way I am and the way I tell my story is maybe somehow not going to be good enough or going to be perceived poorly. But to be honest, I have no control over that. And so whether I say something and people are like, that was such an amazing episode, I loved it so much, or if they say, that was awful, I'm never listening to you again, you're a horrible person, either way, I have no control. And so I'm trying to really step into this space of truly being fully me, fully myself, even if that means that some people don't like it. And even if that means I hurt people or I say something that then, leads them down a path of feeling hurt, right? Because really, I can't hurt anyone. Only our thoughts about the thing hurts us. And I know a lot of people say that that's insensitive and there's like a whole school of thought about it's all about our thoughts and other people can't cause our feelings. I'm not saying that I don't want to show up in a way that is sensitive to other people. I actually consider myself a really kind, generous person, but not at the expense of me not feeling like I'm able to be fully me. And honestly, I think that is the crux of this podcast is how do we navigate this exact conundrum? How do I be fully me in the world and also be kind and loving and generous and thoughtful, right? So part of this is like what I believe about myself is that I am kind and loving and generous and thoughtful. And if anything I say that is my story or how I tell my story comes across to somebody or is perceived by somebody a different way, then honestly, that is on them. And I know that sounds so harsh, at least it sounds harsh to me as I say it. Probably why I've been kind of censoring and filtering myself, but I'm really, really, really trying to step into the full being of myself, which includes my story and how I tell my story. And I know I've given this disclaimer in the past that this is just my story. This is my perception. Other people can have their stories. And honestly, I believe that they probably do. Um, but I've really kind of struggled with that through the last 25 episodes. And today I want to let it be what it is and how I describe it. And I sense some emotion behind all of this. And I want to let myself just embody all of that. And, if whoever listens to this, if it's not your flavor, if it rubs you the wrong way, like maybe listening to this podcast isn't for you. Okay. So I thought about why do I feel shame or hurt or whatever it is I'm feeling? Honestly, it's a lot of feelings about my relationship with my two sisters. The short answer, the short version is that I have two sisters and neither of them choose to speak to me or have a relationship with me at this current moment in time in July of 2021. In fact, one of them just had a baby a few weeks ago, and the way I found out was that, she messaged my daughter on social media and said, "Hey, you have a cousin," and I'm not gonna lie, that is feels a little there's some pain around that, like, first of all, there has been pain for many years around the fact that my children don't have grandparents and don't have cousins. And that experience that I think makes life so rich and amazing that they don't have that. And now they do have a cousin, and I'm not part of that cousin's life. And that there's some pain for me there. I would give almost anything to change the relationships I have with my sisters. And I actually really feel like I have spent a lot of tears over these relationships. I have a lot of regret even today. But ultimately, when it comes down to today, I feel like I have done everything I can do. I have apologized profusely. I have tried to reach out. I have tried to let them reach out. I genuinely feel like I have done all the things that I know how or have come up with to do. And now it's just for me to be me and let them be them. And someday, maybe in the future, I have hope that we can reconcile and we can have relationships. Um, but the fact that I am part of a faith and that I believe to my bones that relationships and family is the most important thing from an eternal perspective, and that I don't really have relationships with my dad or my two sisters, or frankly, any of my family, any of my cousins, aunts, uncles. I don't have relationships with any of them, or at least very, very small, impersonal relationships. That kind of makes me feel like there's something wrong with me, that I should have done something differently, or that I am somehow fundamentally unlovable, unacceptable the way I am. And that, my friends, is what shame is. It's this belief that who we are, how we are, is unlovable, unacceptable, broken, or inadequate in some way. I've done a lot of work to untangle that story. I can logically understand that not all of the relationship I have with my sisters is about me, because they also have agency in the relationship. And honestly, sometimes it feels like I'm a good person. I'm, like I said at the beginning, I am kind and generous and thoughtful. And like, how am I the person who doesn't have relationships? Because they have relationships with each other. And so sometimes I really struggle with that. Like the fact that I choose to live my life, this Christian lifestyle, and being very true to me and true to my conscience and what I think is right in God's eyes, kind of sometimes makes me feel like I'm the wrong one. And that is really, really hard for me to reconcile sometimes. I've done a lot of untangling that story. Clearly, there's still more to untangle because I feel a lot of emotion around it still. Um, I I feel like I'm at a good place overall. I mean, for sure, I think there's always more work to be done, but overall, I feel like I I've done things and said things the way that I needed to in those moments. Sure, looking back, being older and perhaps a tiny bit more wise now, maybe there are some things I would do differently. But at the time, I don't know that I could have known to do anything differently. And at the time, that a lot of the the conversation between us was happening because now my sisters don't choose to talk to me, and there's a part of me too that chooses not to talk to them. The last time we had communication, my sister Facebook messaged me and said, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" And this was fairly out of the blue, as any communication with her normally is. We don't have, and really never have had, regular, like, daily, weekly, monthly, even yearly communication. So when we do communicate, it's usually very sporadically. And, I wanted to respond and say, "Of course, you can ask me any question." And I really had to kind of check myself. And I thought, is that true? And it wasn't that it wasn't true. It is true. She can ask me any question, and I'm willing to answer any question. But I felt myself hesitating because it seems like anytime we enter into relationship again, and what I mean by that is just have communication of some kind, because I do believe we're always in some kind of relationship. I mean, after all, we are blood related, we are sisters. Even death can't part us from that. But when we are in active relationship with one another, it feels like no matter how hard I try, at least on my end, one of us always gets hurt. And so that's what I told her. I said, "Of course, you can ask me anything, but it seems like whenever we talk to each other, one of us gets hurt, and, feelings are hurt. And, maybe just double check yourself." And I was like, "You still are welcome to ask me." And she got, what seemed on my end, it seemed like she got a bit upset about that. And so she was like, "Fine, never mind." So I wanted to go back to my perception of when all this kind of started. And I just have to give a caveat that I don't think my sisters and I have really ever had fantastic relationships, even from childhood. So the event that kind of precipitated all of this happened when me and my next oldest sister were adults. But as I really reflect, I think it probably goes back a lot further than that. But basically, I think the reason why they don't want to talk to me and they don't want to have a relationship with me, in my mind, it's because of what happened after my mom died. And I've spoke about my mom's death in episode 11, but I didn't really talk about what happened afterward. And basically, my there are 3 of us girls. I'm the oldest. I have a sister who's 2 years younger than me, and then I have a sister who's almost 12 years younger than me, so there's a big gap in there. And my sister who's 2 years younger than me, and you guys, I've really thought about, like, should I use names or not? You could probably figure out their names, but it doesn't feel right to me to actually use their names. So I'll just call her the older of the 2. She was an adult, and so because my mom didn't have a will or anything like that, and because she wasn't married to my dad as her next of kin, so first there's like a line of next of kin, so it's usually your spouse, and then it's your children if you have adult children, and then if you don't, it's your parents if they're alive. And I'm sure there's a further line there, but so we were my mother's next of kin, my sister and I together. And she was in the military, so she couldn't, like, take a bunch of time off to deal with my mom's estate and, like, plan a funeral and close out her accounts and things like that. And so I did it. And I'm sure I probably could have said, "I don't want to do this," and walked away as well. But at the time when I was 20 years old, it didn't feel like I could really say that. My mom's sister and brother in law were kind of, I want to use the words at war with my dad. Not really a war. I mean, that makes it sound really dramatic, but they were not on good terms at all. And I sort of felt like I can't just let my dad deal with all of this stuff because, my mom and dad were having a lot of problems before my mom died. And then that would cause my aunt and uncle to be really upset. And so it just felt like I was the right one. And so I did. And the other mercy was that I was in between school semesters. And so I actually had time and space to be able to deal with some of these things. Um, my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, he, he had to go back home to Seattle to deal, he had a job and stuff. My job was really flexible. I had this amazing boss. I was working at a childcare center and I was the office assistant. And so I wasn't like one of the teachers in the classroom, but my position was a lot more flexible. And so my boss was like totally understandable. She was like, you take as much time as you need. Don't worry about us. So I had the space to be able to take care of things, which took a few weeks. And so I did. And I didn't feel like I could really say no to that. So my younger sister was too young. She was only 9 years old at the time, and my other sister was in the military and couldn't take a bunch of time off. And so it fell to me, and I was okay with that, and I understood everybody's position. But what that meant is that I had to make a lot of decisions and a lot of decisions on my own. And I was a very young, I mean, honestly, I'm 41 years old. I still feel like I'm young, but I was way younger. I was like a child almost, really. And I didn't have people to guide me or even people to talk to about it, really. Because if I talked to my dad, he had one opinion. If I talked to my aunt and uncle, they had another opinion. Everybody in my family was one way or the other. And like my husband was amazing, but he didn't know what to do or the right thing to do either. So I was like very much just wading through all of these very adult things to do. And at the same time, I'm totally grieving the loss of my mom. And one of the things was that my mom had taken out a life insurance policy for $25,000. And when I talked to the insurance company, I'm pretty sure I asked them, "What do I do with this money? Like, do I have to pay off bills? Do I, what's this money for?" And they said, "This particular type of insurance policy is a personal injury policy. And because your mom died from a personal injury, you get to do whatever you want with it." And that was worse than if they had told me you should do XYZ, because then I was like, I don't know what to do with this money. And so I wrestled with that question for a while. And I finally decided that what my mom would want would be to split it between us three girls. And because my younger sister was only 9 years old at the time, I thought that she would want me to hold on to that money until she went to college or um, turned 21. I felt like that's like a pretty standard thing in the world with um, trust funds or wills or whatever, right? And so that just felt the best to me. And I tried to give the sister that's older, I tried to give her third, and she didn't want it. She said, "Will you hang on to it for me?" It was something about the military, and I don't even remember all the things. And I was like, "Are you sure? Like, I can hang on to it for you, but I, you know, I feel like you should take this money." And she's like, "No, I'll let you know when I need it." And and then of course my little sister, we held on to that money as well with the intention of giving it to her when she was 21 or going to college. And part of that was that I know my mom valued education so much. She didn't graduate high school. She did take like an equivalency test, but I think she always wanted to go to college. And I know for sure, for me at least, she really wanted me to go to college. And so I just kind of made that assumption that she probably wanted my little sister to go to college too, and that perhaps this was a way that would help her to be able to do that. So that felt fine and good until then my little sister was in foster care. And at the time, I was like 24 years old and had an infant and a toddler, an infant who was growing into a toddler during some of this time. And the state of Washington called me one day and said, "We can't find any other family who are willing to take your sister in. And so you're kind of our last resort because you're in a different state. It makes it a little bit more complicated. But are you interested in having your sister come and live with you and being her guardian?" So, the other thing I should say is at this time, my dad was in prison and she had lived with two different sets of aunts and uncles. And so we had to really pray about that. I mean, we were young, we were in this two-bedroom condo, 900 square feet. It was small. It was going to cost money. We would have to fly up to Washington. We were in California at the time, and we'd have to have a court date and pay a lawyer to file the paperwork and, figure out the process. And that was a hard decision. Like, we didn't feel like we were equipped to take on at this time. I think she was 14, take on a teenager. She was starting high school. But I prayed about it and I felt like if I don't try, then I'm going to just regret it for the rest of my life. And so my husband got on board hesitantly, as he should have been hesitant. And we went through the process, but we realized we had bought a condo in the Bay Area, which completely maxed out our budget. So we were very, very carefully budgeting every single area of our finances. And we didn't have even a few $100s to go get my little sister out of foster care. And so I do remember having a conversation with her on the phone and saying like, "Do you even want us to take you in?" And she said, "Well, yeah, if you can." And I said, "Well, we can't accept that. We're going to have to dip into the money that's yours from mom." And she was like, "Yeah, it's fine. Do that. Whatever we need to do. It's better than being in foster care." Well, years later, we move she comes to live with us. It was fine for a while, and then it turned sour like the other experiences had. And we were moving to Colorado, and we invited her to come with us. We said, "We'll have a bigger house, you'll have your own room, like it'll be better." And she was like, "No, I'd rather go into foster care, back into foster care." So that's what happened. And then of course, there were expenses and things, and I'm honestly don't even remember, but I do remember at a certain point when she was 16, she called me and said, "I need to buy a car. I need some of the money that you owe me." And so I thought, well, that's like a reasonable thing, right? Like her life is not going the way we anticipated. And we have this money earmarked for her. And so, sure, let me send you a couple $1,000s, but then it turned into a thing where it's like, okay, I need more money. I need more money. I need more money. And then pretty soon her part of the money was gone. And when my other sister found out about this, and this had all happened over the course of several years, she was like, "Wait, where did all the money go?" And she was very accusatory and like, "No, Danielle should have that money. And like, if you guys couldn't afford it, then you shouldn't have done it." And of course, all of this is all after the fact. And I was just like, "Hey, the whole time we were just trying to do the best we could. And we were praying about it. And like, I don't know what to tell you, but we don't we don't have the money. She asked for it. She spent it this way, that way, the other way. We spent part of it on, you know, getting her out of foster care. And that just really made my sister upset. She thought I had done it the wrong way and that, I should make up for that and that it's my responsibility to pay all of that back. And I just wasn't in a position to be able to do any of that. I mean, honestly, I wish I had been. I
Yeah.
feel like all of this major, you know, discussion and misunderstanding or whatever you want to call it over the money that we got after mom died, the insurance policy money, and what to do with it and how to handle it was the major precipitating event for my sisters not wanting to have a relationship with me or not wanting to talk to me. And honestly, each of them, we could rewind and there are other things coming into play as well because for example, with my little sister, she lived with us for a year, and a big part of that time was really difficult. And so I'm sure things were done and said in a way that maybe eroded the relationship then. I still, if I think back to that time, I still think I did the best I could with the knowledge and resources I had at the time. I was not trying to take advantage of my sister. I was trying to be as fair as I could be with the situation. And these are like really difficult things to navigate for somebody who's mature and experienced, much less someone who's young and like deer in the headlights, right? And same thing with my other sister. Like we can rewind to things that happened in our childhoods that probably eroded the relationship early on. It wasn't really strong to begin with. So I'm not saying that it was just because of this, but my perception is that this was the tipping point. Um, and it makes me so sad, like that money is the thing. Now, I get it if money is the thing, right? Like we are wired as humans to have that need to survive and stay alive and in our world, money is what does that. But it makes me sad that people put money and their perception of money and their desire to control or have or whatever before their relationships. I I'm not saying that I'm perfect by any means, but I do look back and I think, was I doing that? Was I putting money before my relationships? And I genuinely don't think I was. I genuinely think I was trying to take care of my little sister, take care of my family, do the things that felt right for everyone in the situation. And then I was judged for it, and, like, people told me right out, like, you don't think of other people, you don't take other people's feelings into consideration, you're just always focused on yourself," and, like, oh my gosh, that hurts. That hurts because I just think that that's false. And I think this kinda goes to the point of back to shame. My sister one time told me that she didn't want a relationship with me as long as I was married to my husband. Everyone I know loves my husband. He is a very likable, lovable kind of guy. He's really smart, but he's easygoing, he's funny. I don't really know anyone who has known him, and not that there aren't people, I just haven't known about them who have gotten to know my husband and didn't like him, except for my 2 sisters. And I kind of the message that that sends to me is part of who I am is choosing to marry this man. Part of who I am are the decisions I made when I was the executor of my mom's estate. Part of who I am is how I choose to tell my story, right? And when she said that, it felt like she was saying, I can't accept you fully the way you are. And that's what I think when that is turned to when that how do I say this? When that message is sent to us by ourselves, that's what we call shame. And I just put that together just for this episode is that really what the message I get from my dad and from my sisters is we don't like you the way you are. We don't accept you the way you are, so we don't want to be around you. And that feels really painful. And it feels like shame to me. It feels like there's something about me that if I could change it, if I could fix it, that then maybe they would like me or they would want to have a relationship with me. But what I'm learning is even when it's my own family, that is not something I am willing to sacrifice on. One of my highest values is authenticity, which is being me no matter what. And part of that means that I have to be okay with other people not liking the me that I am. I have done so much work. This is why I'm called to help people overcome the shame or the not enoughness in whatever terms you call that, because that has been my work. I think of the scriptures and I think of like, it brings me so much peace to think of Nephi and how he had to run from his own brothers. And sometimes I think we have this belief, at least in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that like family is the most important. We should do everything we can to make sure our relationships with our family are good. But even in the scriptures, and often in the scriptures, it's family that you have to cut yourself off from. Because when family asks you to be something that you are not, I think that goes against Heavenly Father's plan. I think this is my own personal theory. I think the crux of Heavenly Father's plan for us is to discover who we are and to learn to live fully in that discovery. And of course, along the way, we get to teach and inspire and uplift and serve other people. But I think the main goal is to become more you. And part of the plan was that we couldn't become fully ourselves unless we experienced life in a body. So we had to come to this earth, we had to get a body, which requires us to have all of the human emotions, the disappointment, the anger, the joy, the love, the sadness, the boredom, like whatever those feelings are. Our feelings about a variety of topics are what determine who we are. And it's how we experience who we are. So when anyone, this could be your family, for me in this episode, this is my family, when anyone says, we don't like you or we don't accept you the way you are, I don't know. I just think that it's more important for me to be the way I am and who I am and live fully in that than it is to be accepted by those people. Okay, this has been a much longer episode than my normal episodes. And I'm just going to leave it at that. That is enough for now. I don't necessarily have a lesson or a learning beyond that, other than every time I get to get in front of this microphone and speak, I learn so much. And I truly hope you are too. But I'm going to try to just live in that, in the being of it, instead of the picking it all apart and learning the lessons from it. There is nothing else that would make me happier than to continue the conversation with you. And there are several ways to do that. You can rate or review the podcast, and that definitely shows me what you're thinking. I would love it also if you would share the podcast, or you can connect with me on social media at Danita Bremer Coaching. I would love to hear your questions, your insights, and it would help me figure out what direction, which stories to tell. Until next time, go be you and follow the Spirit.